Okay, so good morning. First, thank you for this invitation. I have a great pleasure for the last 2 days. I'm going to try, Alain, to talk in the microphone. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about how group affiliation is going to impact on our low-level perception. And I called it to be or not to be Charlie because of the event in Paris in January. And in fact, my result, in a way, prevented me to completely affiliate to this movement of to be Charlie, and you'll see why. But let me start by, so in a way, my contribution in a way today is going to be about group contagion and about the fact that Itzhak wrote that the group environment is necessary for maintenance of the syndrome and its propagation. But as you're going to see, it's a tiny contribution. It's about one thing, which is about how we perceive other people's social signals. But before doing that, I want to start by talking about something that I didn't witness, but my partner, Simon Aragin, witnessed a few years ago in 1995 in Rwanda after the end of the war. So, multidisciplinarity, I'm a neuroscientist, but every day I share a life with a sociologist, an anthropologist. And he's working for ONG. So he's at the moment in Kiev, in Donetsk. Before he was in Gaza, he went a lot in Africa, and he was in Rwanda in 1995, and he witnessed a massacre of 5,000 people in 1 hour in front of himself. And so yesterday I called him and I said, can I do a proper interview of you? Because, I'm in this conference and basically I don't know what I can bring, but I would be very happy to have your in a way, thought about all that. So I asked him, why do you think this massacre happened? And I think if there is not... all the links are not there for the syndrome E, but some of them are there, and you're going to recognize also some of the words that have been pronounced and that we talked about yesterday. The first one, he talked about fear. He said that, the massacre happened because there was fear in both sides. So I know that we're talking about flat emotional reaction, so maybe there is not a direct connection with syndrome E, but what he says, so the massacre happened, it's the Tutsi who killed 5,000 people, Hutu, so it was the reverse. So it was a camp of 100,000 people of Hutu, surrounded by few Tutsi guards, and this is what happened. And so Simon was telling me that one, the Hutu expressed fear because they knew what they have done, of course, and also they were in this camp because they were screened, so people who had done the massacre before would be taken into court. And then the Tutsi soldiers were really also in the state of fear because they had this fear that the people would escape from the camp, and there were few of them for 100,000 of them. So there was this fear of escaping and also the hate of those people after they have been done. But he also talks about solidarity, and we talked about the positive sides of group membership, and one of them is always solidarity. But he said there, I could see the solidarity of the soldier. If one of them start to shoot, then everybody's also come and continue to shoot with the other one. You're not going to let only one during the massacre. So he said, I could see the contagion within the group of soldiers. And we also talked yesterday about dehumanized, and I think he said this is also one of the things. So why do I talk about that? Because when he told me that story a few years ago, I was struck by one thing, which is what I would call the misperception. So the massacre started because the rain started. And, it has nothing to do with threat or anything. But because it started to rain, then the Hutu started to run. And the running part was misinterpreted by the Tutsi. They thought that the people were trying to escape from the camp, and they started to shoot. And that struck me in terms of, how this group membership here defined more in terms of, who was inside the fence and outside the fence, is enough to provoke this. And this was, the first part is the misperception of one event, one action. So this is what I'm going to try to talk about today. So we heard about it yesterday. I mean, we could say that there is this multiplicity of the self, and there is three fundamental components: the individual self, the relational, so the dyadic self, and the group selves. And as Stephen said elegantly yesterday, those different elements of the self system are going to be engaged at different times and different contexts. And we could define the individual self or self that reflects the person's subjective uniqueness, so their trait, behavior, hobbies, interests, aspiration, and goals. And this is different with what we could call either the group selves, as Ellemer proposed, or the collective selves, which indicate a temporary transformation of the conception of self from an individual to a group level, at which, therefore, collective concerns become more important than individual difference. And what we know is that we have a very strong need to affiliate, and it is so strong that people have a tendency to quickly form and identify with group, even under very arbitrary premises. And this is the work done by Tashfeld, notably. So what we know is that we are going to identify with existing groups, such as gender, race, age, and we can also identify with situationally relevant group. And for example, after what happened in Paris, we all had this strong need to affiliate to the to be Charlie, in a way, group. And this is very dependent on the context. What we know from the literature is that this tendency to affiliate with a group, and once we affiliated with one, is going to impact on how we see ourselves, but also on how we're going to perceive others. And there is advantage and disadvantage of this. The first one is that the advantage is that it's going to help making sense of a situation more quickly. It's going to facilitate our anticipation of other potential impending behavior. The positive side is solidarity. We're going to help others, but so it's also alter, therefore, our perception, judgment, and behavior. So how does it change our perception? For example, we perceive in-group members are more diversified. We have the tendency to remember them better than out-group members. We judge in-group members as being more attractive, competent, friendly, honest. We have this tendency to recognize easily the feature in their faces that provide trust cues. And we're going, of course, to change our behavior towards them by being more helpful or favor those in-group than out-group. So this is the pro-social way of helping in-group members. But we also, by changing all those behavior, we're going to, in a way, change the way we perceive them. So I'm going to talk now how, it impacts the way we perceive other people's social signals, and notably how we perceive their emotional expression. And what we can see in the literature is that there is a tendency to associate group membership, even generic one, even arbitrary ones, to spatial facial affect. So, for example, here, this is an experiment done with morphing. So if I show you morphs of faces from anger to happy, for example, and I ask you to press when you think the hostility is going to stop to become a smile, what we can see is that the mean response latency is going to be bigger for Black people than white people. So you perceive the faces, the expression on the face as longer, as displaying for longer time angry or anger as compared to happy, if it's not from your group. Like here, it's from a Black people. Another way to test that is to ask people, what do you feel when you perceive somebody who express fear or happiness as a function of their group membership? And what has been shown is that if I see somebody from the out group expressing fear, I'm going to feel positive feeling, because it's a sort of weakness from the out group. And I am going to have the reverse feeling, so negative feeling, if the out group is expressing joy, because it's a sort of signal of strength, and it's going to be the reverse for in-group. So there is this tendency to associate, in-group members and with positive affect and out-group member with negative affect. Another way to show that is to, for example, use an answer which requests approach movement and avoidance movement. And again, we can see the same effect. If I show you somebody who expresses fear or happiness, what we can see is that you have a tendency to avoid more people from the out group expressing, for example, happiness. And finally, there is this experiment done by Dunham that I like, because what he shows is that, again, if I show you facial expression of anger versus happy, you're going to have a tendency to over-categorize faces displaying anger as out-group, then in-group, and the reverse for happy, and I'm going to talk about that a lot today. But what he shows is that this is not specific to races. This is not, black and white. If he does the minimal if he uses the minimal paradigm group, which I'm going to explain later, is going to show exactly the same. So this is a way to just create very quickly arbitrary groups. And what he shows is that the same tendency appears. So it's not specific to race, it's in a way general to any types of group you're going to affiliate to. So, and the idea here is that by doing that, it's going to contribute to this intergroup bias, or the way we favorized in-group people and we, in a way, prejudice out-group members. So there is lots of theories about how intergroup bias and, what are the mechanisms behind intergroup bias, and I'm not going to present all of them, but I'm going to present one that has been proposed recently by Ratner, and which I found very elegant and which I've tried a bit further in my studies. So what Ratner et al. Did is the following. So they used a minimal group, which is designed to avoid any impact of prior social knowledge. So the idea is very simple. I'm going to show you later, or I can show you now. Maybe it's easier. So the idea is the following one. You enter into the lab, and this is what I've done in my own study. And when you arrived, I do a drawing lot. I ask you to take one of those pieces of paper, and basically you're going to be assigned to the blue group or the green group. And that's it. No further information, nothing else. No games, no competition between people, just this part of the room is blue, this part of the room is green. That's it. This is completely arbitrary. You just sat there, you're green. That's it. So this is the minimal group. I mean, there are different versions. The way Ratner did it is he presented many dots on the screen, and he asked you how many dots are there in the screen, and you're going to give a number, and he's going to say, well, you're part of the underestimator or you're part of the overestimators. So that's the cover story of Ratner. And then he built some very elegant stimuli, which are the following ones. So he takes a face, which is, in fact, a mean face. He averaged, 50 people, 50 males. And then on this face, he's going to add random noise, okay? And this random noise is going to add it over the face. And here, he put the inverse noise of this one. And like that, he can create 600 stimuli. It's always the same face, just the noise change a bit. And it gives the impression that the two faces are slightly different, but it's exactly the same. Okay? And the cover story of his experiment is that scientists have shown that, we can see in the faces feature that tells us who is over or under estimator of the number of the point. And that's it. And then each time he shows you two faces and he asks you to choose which one you think is an overestimator. That's it. And he does that for 600 times with different noise. And the logic here is the following, is that on each trial, the participant is going to solve the task by comparing the two faces presented on the screen, and they're going to do the task by, in a way, using their mental representation of what the in-group and out-group members should look like to be able to decide. And so if participant responds in a systematic way, then we're going to see a sort of systematic pattern in the pixel, and that's going to emerge and reveal the mental or the visual representation we have about what an in-group member should look like and an out-group member should look like. So it's a sort of purely data-driven visualization of what you have in your mind. And I think it's a beautiful experiment because of that. So this is what it did. They tested a lot of people, showed them the 600 times this with different types of noise, and then they averaged, what people consider to be in-group or out-group members. And this is what they show. So this is the average image of in-group people, and this is the average image of out-group people. And then what they did with those images is that they asked another group of participants to judge those two faces on different scales, how attractive they think those two faces are, intelligent, responsible, confident, trustworthy, etc., etc. And what they show is that those two faces elicited, in-group faces elicited more favorable impression than out-group presentation. So the trait here were more trustworthiness, confidence, and so you would tend to approach more this person than the out-group people. So what this experiment tells us is that one, facial representation can directly contribute probably to trait inference and then affect, our way to behave towards in-group and out-group members. So it's going to participate to intergroup bias. The other thing that this experiment suggests is that as soon as we're going to affiliate to a group, we're going to prompt divergent mental representation, visual mental representation for in-group and out-group members. And what Ratner suggested is that those representations could act as top-down expectation, which are going to constrain how we perceive others. So that was his suggestion, and in fact, at the same time, I was doing an experiment trying to see exactly the same. So we wanted to test the idea that, as soon as we affiliate to a group, we're going to create mental representation of how the other look like, and this is going to constrain my perception. So this has two implications at the neural level. The first one is that the brain regions that compute group-related expectation are going to feed lower brain regions with prediction of what you should look like if you're part of my group or if you're part of another group. And the other implication is that the level of activity, which is going to be found here in visual areas, is going to reflect how much my prediction is in agreement with what I'm seeing in the world. Okay, so the more it's discrepant, the more it's different from what I expect, the more I'm going to see activity within those visual areas. So it's going in a way to calculate the prediction error between how I expect you to look like and what I see in my world. And this is what we tested. So to do that, we built an experiment where, in a way, we dissociated in time the information about group membership and the information about emotional expression. So I'm going to present you 3 experiments. The first 2 were done to replicate what has been shown previously in the literature in terms of this association between positive affect and in-group member and negative affect and out-group members. And the last one was to try to understand how it works in the brain. So in the 3 experiments, it was always the same. First, you had a fixation cross, which is in fact this square, and then you perceive a first agent here, which was never looking at you. It was turned by 45 degrees. But when this person appeared, the fixation square changed color and give you information about what is the group membership of this person, whether it was green or whether it was blue. And then a second picture will appear, so the person were suddenly turning towards you, looking at you with an emotional expression or not. So. And then you'll have to do different types of answer. This doesn't work, sorry. So I explained to you the minimal group. What you have to know is that it's very efficient to create this group. We can see that there is in-group preference. And what I found more interesting is that, for example, here we have a standard pattern of racial bias with more negative affect for black people than white. But if I do a minimal group on you, and part of the room is black and white, we can see that the racial bias is going to be, in a way, to disappear with a minimal group paradigm. So it's enough to make this racial bias disappear, and there you're going to have only positive evaluation irrespective of the race of the people that are in your group. Okay? So it's a very efficient paradigm to create group affiliation. And as I say, the way we did it in the lab was to just drawing lots, and you were green or blue. So the paradigms were as follows. So you had in-group, some people were in-group green and others were in-group blue. Of course, this was randomized across subject. And what we did is that we show people either expressing anger or neutral expression or joyful anger, and they were part of your group or not. And the hypothesis from what we've seen in the literature is that you expect people from your in-group to express joy and people from out-group to express anger, and those 2, therefore, are unexpected expression. So to test that, we did a first experiment where, again, fixation, and then this person appeared with a neutral expression, but with the color code telling you whether she was part of your group or not. She turned her head, expressed one emotion, and then I ask you, how did you feel when you perceived that person? What was the intensity of your feeling when confronted to that person? And what we show is the following. If you have somebody expressing anger, the intensity of your feeling is much higher, although it's exactly the same actor and the same expression, because this is randomized across subject, when you perceive somebody expressing anger from an out-group than an in-group, and the reverse is true for happiness. So you perceive the smile as more, it prompts more intense feeling in you if the smile is from an in-group person than an out-group person. So expected group emotion association drive more intense feeling in the participants. In a second experiment, we thought, can we see that when we ask people to categorize the emotion? So this time we're going to make a bit more time pressure on the participants. So again, the person appear, and then the emotion picture appear, but only for 300 milliseconds this time. So it's quite short, and I'm going to ask them to tell me whether that was happy or anger. So it's categorization and as quick as possible. And this is what we see, same pattern. So if I force people to categorize, what we see is that people are going to over-categorize out-group as expressing anger and in-group as expressing a smile. And if we look a bit deeper in those data, what we show is that, in fact, this pattern of categorization is not due to any change in the way you are able to discriminate feature about happiness or anger in the face of others. It's a bias. As soon as you see in-group, you're going to say joy. As soon as you see out-group, you're going to say anger. Whatever the amount of evidence within those facial traits of anger or happy, whatever, you have this strong bias towards happy in, anger out. So I thought it was a nice demonstration, that we have this strong association as a function of the facial affect and as a function of your group membership. Now, the last experiment we did was to try to understand what's happening in the brain. So what we did the EEG and the fMRI. So for those who don't do those methods, or those who do, they know that it's quite complex, so it took us a long time to analyze those data, but the idea was to try to understand when and where does this effect happen, and how quick it is, and this is why we used EEG. So we changed the task again, but the paradigm principle are the same. Fixation cross, first person appear with group membership information, then the person turns towards you with an emotion or not, but there it stayed for more than 1 second, and then later you had to answer what was the group of that person. It's an incident task. I mean, of course, people are, at 100%, they are very good at answering. I didn't want them to focus on the emotion. I just wanted to see how they process emotion as a function of the group of the person. So what did we found? What we found is that, so what we did is we analyzed the first picture here, and then the second, so how the group membership influence emotion. But I'm going to present you first what's happening during this first picture. So what happened during the first picture is that we can see that in 150 milliseconds, people are able to process group membership information, fair enough. That the difference here, so it's on this P150 waves, and what we see is that in a way there is more, even though you have to EEG, it's when it goes up, so it's more activity for in-group than out-group. But what we wanted to know also is the source of such dissociation. And what we saw is that group membership is processed within these brain areas here, which is the medial prefrontal cortex, which we've seen quite often during the last 2 days. And what it tells us is something that is not really new. We know that this region has an established role in low-level classification and categorization, either of social or even non-social events. So it's going to dissociate categories between them. But what we see here is that there is higher activity for in-group than out-group, which in a way is consistent with the idea that in-group persons are more interesting than for me. So they attract more my attention, and this is why probably, we know that we memorize better in-group faces, etc., etc. So, this is consistent with the literature. What happened now in the second picture? So as soon as the second picture arrives, what we see is that there is a very, very early impact. So again, this is how prior knowledge of my group is going to impact on how I perceive emotional signals. And what you can see here is that before 100 milliseconds, so it's really, really rapid, what we see is that there is more activity for unexpected conditions as compared to expected conditions. So the brain has dissociated those 4 conditions not as a function of group, neither as a function of the expression, but as a function of what I expect you to display as a function of your group. And what we see is that anger from my in-group and happiness from out-group are surprising events compared to the other two. So this time it's the reverse as compared to the behavior. And if we look at the neural sources of this effect, we can see that it's the STS here, which is known to be involved in early emotional processing, but we hear also that it may be involved in theory of mind, although I don't think it's doing that on its own, but it's as a network connected to other regions. But what it shows is that there is very early polarized activity, which probably are due to top-down influence from the medial prefrontal cortex. And the last finding we have is that the more people dissociate during the first picture in group from out group, so the more there is activity in this medial prefrontal, the more you have activity in the STS. So the more they dissociated those two groups, the more their expectation and association between in-group and positive and out-group and negative is strong. So what does these results tell me? They tell me that, as soon as we affiliate to a group, even if it's a very arbitrary group as green and blue, my brain is going to prompt visual representation of what you as an in-group member or you as an out-group member should look like. And those visual representations are going to constrain the way I'm going to perceive your real expression in a way. And the level of activity here in the STS tells us that when there is an error between what I expect and what I see in the words. So, to conclude about that, this is why, when there was this event in Paris, I'm not sure I wanted to really be part of Charlie, because I know that it meant that I would have different ways of perceive people who were not Charlie, and it would change the way I appraise their emotional expression, their facial feature, and it could make me mislead in a way my perception towards hostility where there was nothing than neutral expression. And I think we have to, I like Stefan's intervention by saying we should look at ourselves rather than other people, and I think, this is a first piece to say we have to be careful on how we categorize other people, because it has very quick ways to influence our behavior and already our perception. And just to finish, I wanted also to talk about, so this is, adding the fuel to the fire in a way, which is, as soon as you affiliate to a group, you change your perception. But there is a paper that just went out in PNAS, which I found very interesting, and which shows both in political group, but also between Israel and Palestinian, that in a way, we misattribute. So there is this, he calls it the fundamental motivation attribution bias, which is people attribute out-group action to out-group hate more than in-group love, but they attribute the same action to their in-group as in-group love than out-group hate. So, I think this is another thing. So between the misperception and this fundamental motive attribution bias, this is already a start where we're going to perceive others and in-group very differently. And I just want to thank for your attention and all the people who did the work with me.